let's just get into the story. The first story that we're going to be reading is called A Peculiar Kind of Madness by Matt Timersky. I'd always known that my great-grandmother was an orphan, but in late October of last year, she decided to tell me the truth about what happened to her family. We were visiting her for her birthday. It was a tradition in our household, a road trip we knew in the back of our minds we'd take only a few more times. She was turning 98, so that was just the cold hard truth of the matter. In my childhood, the journey to central Iowa had been a fun and light-hearted affair, but now my brother and parents could only maintain strained politeness as we met up and hit the road together. Each of us knew that this trip might be our last. For several hours, we drove through vast open farm fields that stretched from horizon to horizon. My great-grandma's house was down a narrow dirt road off a white dirt road off a gravel tractor lane. As a city boy, it was more or less the most remote possible dwelling I could imagine. She was born there and had lived her entire life there and would soon, well, as we parked in an open muddy rectangle and stepped out to stretch our legs, the constancy of the place surrounded me. Every single year of my life, this house and its land had been exactly the same. The sky was open blue, the earth was a sea of waving gold, and the wind was a smooth river of cold warmth. There was never anything to mar those three pillars of sensory experience except the house, the barn, a defunct old tractor, and the bell. The bell was a simple thing, raised high on an old metal crook. It sat out in the fields about a quarter-mile from the house, serving as a measure of the wind. If a storm was coming, the bell was supposed to ring, a necessary precaution in tornado country. The only problem was, the bell and its crook had rusted over long ago. Every time I got out of the family van from age 5 to age 26, I glanced that direction and felt a sense of unease as my gaze fell upon that decayed artifact. This time, at age 27, I looked over and saw that the bell had been scraped and polished clean of rust. It glinted in the sunlight, practically daring me to look at it. I followed my family inside while struggling with a feeling of dread I couldn't articulate. Who had cleaned the bell, and why? I tried to stop thinking about it as we gathered in the kitchen and said our hellos. My great-grandma was making tea and shooed off our attempts to help. She was a frail woman for whom movement was difficult, but she never let anything stop her. The Wi-Fi password is on a note in the living room. She told us with unquestionable authority, "Go stare at your phones and the tea will be ready in a moment." My brother and I did as we were told, but my parents turned on the television instead of looking at their phones. For a few minutes, we stayed in our separate worlds, only returning to the present when my great-grandma brought in the tea. And we had a nice time. That night, when everyone else was long asleep, I happened to open my eyes and see a glow under the door of the guest room I shared with my brother. My parents were in a different room and will not see the same light, so it was up to me to investigate. Quietly, so as not to wake him, I grabbed up and down, finding my great-grandma still awake. She sat in her big jade leather chair, her gaze on the television. She asked me without looking my way, "You don't fall for this stuff, do you?" was 10 years old that night. It was my birthday. My mother had gotten me a small cake about the size of your fist. I looked forward to that cake every year. Since we didn't exactly have sweets pounding about back then, it was 11 cents, so rather expensive. But my mother got one for every one of us on our birthdays, no matter what she had to scrimp or save. All year long, I saw Mary get her cake in January, Arthur get his cake in March, Eleanor in June, Clarence in July, then Ruth a week after Clarence. Then it was months and months until me, the odd one out, on October 29th. I was so excited for that cake. As the days rolled closer, as the morning dawned, as the hours inched by, I hopped around the house like a bunny rabbit. But I wasn't allowed to eat it until well after supper. I stared at the clock, so I know, yes, that one on the mantel there, the brass and the chrome one, the same one, but I stared at the clock, so I know. Night fell at 6:41. That was the moment. Bright orange stopped glinting up that clock, and my mother rose to light a lamp. I looked up at her. Now, she smiled and shook her head. My brothers and sisters complained in a chorus in support of me, but she just shook her head at them. Too soon, and she'll ruin her supper. Father came in from the fields not long after, dirty and tired as all get out. He ate in silence while we chattered endlessly about the type of cake it would be. Under the frosting, who knew? It might be raspberry, vanilla, or even chocolate. We grew silent as Father neared the clearing on his cleaning of his plate, an event which would mark the end of supper. 4 pieces of meat and bread remained, and then 3, then 2. Any moment now. He stopped at the last piece, holding it unmoving above the remaining dollop of gravy. We turned our heads. It was the bell. The bell was ringing out in the fields. Father grunted, then put the last piece of his food back on his plate before rising. He opened the front door. We braced ourselves for the wind, but none came. He spat on and held up a finger to the night air, then shook his head. He moved back into our lamplight and sat. Arthur asked, "Is it gonna storm?" Mary asked, "Is there gonna be a tornado?" My mother shook her head, smiled at us, and told us not to worry. No wind meant no storm. But that bell kept ringing. My father dipped his last piece of food in the gravy and prepared to eat it despite the constantly ringing bell. But then sighed and put it back down. He motioned to Clarence. Clarence was the oldest, so he understood. He was nearly a man himself, and tying the bell would be no problem. He grabbed a candle, protected the flame with his hand, and headed out the open front door. My brothers and sisters and I piled up to the window. Opening it, we found nothing but absolutely still, chilly air. We watched this little spot of light move around the burning this way and that. She even raised the house lamp near her face, and we saw her shouting into the darkness. We just didn't hear anything. Nothing except that constantly clanging bell, growing faster in pace and louder in urgency. Mary, Eleanor, and I looked up at our parents with fearful gazes. My father shook his head, speaking for the first time that night. So there's wind out there after all. The air is like a river inside an ocean. It's moving fast out there, carrying her voice away, but we can't feel it here. My mother seemed worried, but she nodded and accepted that. We saw her accepting it, so we gulped and believed it too. We all glued our eyes to that open window. Ruth reached the bell, and in that stronger light it entered our view unmoving at the exact same time we heard it stop ringing. Ruth looked this way and that, clearly concerned. She seemed to silently yell a time or two before moving closer to the motionless bell. A half-tied rope hung from the crook, an indication that someone had attempted to tie it, but we couldn't see Clarence or Arthur anywhere near her. She put the lamp down on the ground to free her hands for tying the rope the rest of the way, but that mostly hid the light among the low-lying, recently harvested stalks. We waited, breaths held. The air held in my lungs started to burn. At long last, we were forced to breathe again. Ruth's light continued to sit there, barely visible between the broken plants. "What's taking so long?" Mary asked. Eleanor said, "I hope she's all right." Father told us, "She's fine. Damn kids are just playing a game with us." Our mother nodded in agreement. "Eleanor, go fetch your sister, will you?" Eleanor shook her head. "No way, it's scary out there. It's just a game. You're not playing a game with us, too, are you?" "No," Eleanor gulped. "Then go get your sisters and brothers. Tell them to come back in." It was pitch black out there and almost the same inside with us, save for one lone candle. Trembling, Eleanor took our last candle and crept out into the night, scooting along the side of the house to stay as close to us as possible. Shakily, she called, "Ruth, Arthur, Clarence." This isn't funny anymore. Now it was we who sat in the dark as Eleanor began to move further away with the last of our light. We tensed. Father eyed the open front door, and Mother softly moved to close and latch it. I wonder what they meant by that move, because how were we, the others, supposed to get back in? But I suppose they'd unlatch it if anyone came back and knocked. Mother moved away from us in search of more candles. Through it all, the bell kept ringing out in the dark. Increasingly scared, I held Mary's hand tightly and yelled out the window, "Be careful, Ellie." She must have happened to cross that invisible silent threshold at the moment, because she turned around in surprise and stepped closer. "I heard your voice go quiet, but there is no wind. Papa's wrong." She stepped away again. "See, when I pass this point, She held up the candle to show her that her mouth was still moving, but we heard nothing. Come to think of it, her hair wasn't moving. We hadn't seen Ruth's pajamas billowing in any wind. When I asked Father, "What's doing that? What's making it quiet out there?" "It's just a game," Father insisted. "They're all lying. She's just pretending to make noise so it looks like she's being silenced." Eleanor reached the bell. Father's grip on my shoulder squeezed to nearly painful. She reached out for the lamp Ruth had left, lifting it with one hand and holding the candle with the other. She approached the clanging bell. "See," Mary whispered to Father, "the candle's not going out even though she's not protected still hear it ringing. Next to me, Mary began to cry. "It's a game," the father said angrily. "It's just a game they're playing." Eleanor threw the lamp at something in the darkness. We saw the lamp crash, shatter, and go dark, but we heard nothing. She raced towards us, candle in hand, but the flame went out because of her haste. We waited to hear her approaching or scream, but nothing followed. The bell continued to clang. We waited in terrified silence. Mother returned with a candle for each of us, and we sat vigil at the window. Nothing and no one moved. For hours, the bell clanged without wind. The night remained pitch black. The bell clanged and clanged and clanged, driving deeper into our ears with each passing minute. Near midnight, we broke. Father was beyond agitated. "Mary, go find your brothers and sisters." "No," she cried. "I'm not going out there." Mother glared at her. "You have to. This game has to stop." Urged on by both of them, Mary burst into tears and climbed out the window. Holding her small candle, she inched out into the fields. Her sobs went quiet as she passed the same point out in the darkness. Her flame reached the bell, and the ringing stopped. Her flame snuffed out. We held our breaths. The bell began ringing again. Father clenched his fists. "Go." I turned and saw he was looking at me. I suddenly realized I was the only child left in the house, and I felt horribly alone. Everything in me shrieked against the thought of going out into that cursed night. No. My mother wavered in place, no longer adamantly in line with my father. She began to cry too. "What are you doing?" he demanded. "It's just a game. There's nothing to be scared of." She screamed and demanded, "Why do you keep saying that? Why have I been helping you to do this?" He grabbed her and shouted in her face, "Because we haven't been sending our children to their deaths. That's not what's happening." She pushed his hands away and ran for the window. Pushing past me, she stumbled out and ran screaming towards the still clanging bell. Not out of fear of father, but out of terror for her children. "Arthur, Clarence, Ruth, Eleanor, Mary, for God's sake, where are you?" He growled and leaped out after her, yelling, "We didn't kill them. Everything is fine." They both continued shouting until they passed at that point in the dark, and all went silent, except for the bell. Twice more, it stopped ringing. Twice more, it began again. In panic and terror beyond reason, I closed and latched the window and pushed all of the furniture against every entry to the house. I curled in a cupboard, holding the last candle up to my face as it slowly melted its way down towards my fingers. I was alone. Somehow, I was alone. We'd all seen the danger and stared right at it as it happened, but one by one they'd all gone out there anyway. I'd been surrounded by a full band of siblings my entire life, and now I was completely and utterly alone in a house in the middle of nowhere. By the length of my candle, it was 3 in the morning when the knock came at the door. I trembled, but did not make a sound. The knock sounded again 40 heartbeats later. It was louder this time. I shook, holding my candle tight. The third knock was more like a tremendous crash or kick, and I heard the door explode inward. 60 heartbeats of silence passed, and then the floorboards creaked. Something in me told me to put out my candle for fear of it being seen through the cracks in the cupboard, but I didn't dare. Not darkness. I couldn't handle darkness. I would scream if I did, so I kept it lit. Slowly, quiet steps moved through the house. Whoever it was seemed to be pausing and listening at times, while at sat expectantly, mouth open and eyes wide as I waited for my great-grandmother to continue. After a bit, that I realized that was it. But what do you see? She shook her head. That's not the point. I'm here, so obviously I survived. And a young man like you doesn't need to know what horrors walk this world outside the paved cities of men. Gulping, I asked, "You're not just pulling my leg. This really happened." Yes, her gaze went distant by television light. But here's what I want to tell you, and what you should tell your brother. The thing that opened the cupboard door and stared at me from the dark. The thing that hoped to wait out my candle before the coming of dawn. Had a bell tied to one of its teeth, and with a blood-soaked rag, such that it would clang when its mouth was opened for hunting. Somehow, some way, some heroic poor soul managed to tie a warning bell to that thing before they died. We heard that warning bell all night long, and yet my entire family walked out there one by one. We didn't listen because we didn't want to listen. My father knew what he was doing halfway through, but he didn't want to accept what he'd already done. So he did even worse to continue living the lie. I narrowed my eyes. What are you saying? She grabbed my hand briefly. Fear will tell you to put your candle out, but your head will tell you to keep it lit. Don't give in to fear. You keep it lit. You'll get through this. Turning my head, I became aware of a sound in the distance. Is that the bell? I was so caught up I didn't notice. How long has that been ringing? She just clenched her fist and turned back to the television. So, the second story I'll be reading is called My Wives Don't Get Along by Tobias Wade. Have you ever wanted to love someone but couldn't? That's how I felt about Tammy. We never should have gotten together in the first place, but it was her birthday and I didn't know what I was getting myself in for. She invited all 5 of us from the office and I was expecting to just have a drink and go home. Fast forward to the bar. Half an hour passed when we were all supposed to meet. And every time her phone buzzed, I knew it was another person canceling at the last minute. But she was glowing with warmth, and that wasn't dampened by her disappointment. And I had nowhere else to be. And hours can melt together so fast when you found someone to be lonely with. Tammy blamed herself for how the party turned out in a vicious, self-deprecating way that left me scampering to reassure her, and the harder she was on herself, the kinder I had to be. Until somehow, without meaning to, I called her beautiful because I couldn't bear her thinking otherwise for another minute. The way her face lit up in response was proof that I wasn't lying, and the way she smiled back made me feel like it was the first time she'd ever really believed those words. Tammy stayed close to me as we were living together, close enough to feel her breath on my neck. Then her arms were wrapped around my arm, and her warmth wasn't just something to be imagined anymore, just to keep her balance, she said, but no amount of steadying herself was enough for her to let go. She'd been drinking after all, and needed someone to drive her home. Well, I think she really was beautiful that night, and the more of her she trusted me to see, the more beautiful she became. But love, it wasn't her fault that she came to love me, and it wasn't my fault that Well, I think she really was beautiful that night, and the more she trusted me to see, the more beautiful she became. But love, it wasn't her fault that she came to love me, and it wasn't my fault that I couldn't feel the same. A starving man doesn't care what he eats though, and the lonely will cling to anyone who makes them forget what it's like to be alone. Tammy and I stayed together, and the phrase, "maybe this is what love is supposed to feel like," kept hopping up in my head. Tammy treated me with devotion and smothered me in kindness, and the longer we stayed together, the harder it became to imagine my life being any other way. Tammy would do anything to keep me, and she reminded me every day I could think of no better way to thank her than everything I had to give. She was nothing but joy on the day I asked her to marry me, and basking in that light I told myself that her happiness would be enough for the both of us for all my years ahead. Then there was my other wife. The one with the shaved head, the one with the nose rings, the leather jacket, and the tattoos of snake twisting from one tie to the next. I don't know if you could call Sarah beautiful, certainly not in the same way you could call Tammy, but you could call her other names and they'd all turn her on. I met Sarah in another town where my company's headquarters was. I had to go once a month, every month, but it didn't take long before I found an excuse to go every weekend instead. Tammy was pregnant, and I wasn't proud about what I was doing, but neither was I ashamed, because any guilt I should have felt was a drop in the ocean that was love. Sarah was everything I'd ever known. I'd never known I'd wanted. She was wild, unrestrained, insatiable. She was a witch who put me under her spell, a demon who had claimed my soul. There are types of excuses I tell myself whenever the guilt began to crawl up my spine. When I'd hold Tammy at night, I tell myself stories of all the mad things men have ever done for love, and I put myself in their noble company. When I fell asleep, I dream of being back with the girl whose touch was fire. A weekend was never enough to spend with Sarah, and every time was harder to leave than the last. I couldn't leave Tammy with a child though, and the anxious worry that this had to end began eating away at me at night and day. I kept them both a secret from each other, swinging back and forth, barely trusting myself to call one by name without my tongue betraying me with the others. The more the pressure grew, the more insecure and defensive I became, until one day, by surprise, Sarah told me she was jealous of my time. She didn't want me to leave again. She wanted to be my wife, and fool that I was, I told her I wanted the same. It wasn't a very official wedding. Sarah wasn't into that sort of Not even at her trial, where I was called as a witness. I couldn't even meet her eyes when I told the jury about the affair, that I loved her, that I knew it was wrong. I told them that Zara had been jealous, and that she'd killed the child, and that I never wanted to see her again. The only thing that could have been harder to bear was when Tammy forgave me. She said it wasn't my fault, that I'd made a mistake, that we could learn to be happy together again. And I believed her, because as heavy as this weight was for me to bear, I knew that I couldn't bear it alone. That was almost 20 years ago, and Tammy and I have moved past it best we could. We had 2 more children, both boys. I'm glad of that, because if we'd had a girl, I don't think I could have looked at her without thinking about the child who had been cut. If Tammy can still love me after all that, then who am I to say that I can't love her in return? Despite everything I'd done to avoid being alone, though, I know that it's only a matter of time. Tammy is sick and she isn't going to get any better. I've been spending every day at my wife's side, and our youngest will be leaving to college in a few weeks. Then it's just going to be me and my regrets, thinking about the words Tammy said to me last night. I told you I'd do anything to keep you, and I did. She told me, if you didn't think Zara killed our daughter, you never would have stayed with me. So I had to do it, don't you see? We've made each other so happy through the years. I always knew I never loved her, but it's taken me my entire life to find out why. The third story is called Every Year on My Birthday I Have to Die by Richard Saxon. I died for the first time on the 18th of August 2006. It wasn't a particularly pleasant death, nor was it one that I expected. It was simply the random act of violence that destroyed my life, and it came out of nowhere. We were just relaxing at the pub, enjoying a few drinks after a busy day at work, when it was my turn to buy a round of drinks. So I was trying to get the attention of the bartender. I felt someone punch me in the side. At first, I thought someone had just hit me. But then I felt the warmth and the rapid stream of blood pouring down my shirt. I realized then and there that I'd actually gotten stabbed. As far as I can remember, it wasn't even that painful. Still, when my legs gave out under me and I collapsed to the floor, even then I worried more about ruining my expensive suit, ignoring the fact that I might be dying. Oncoming death is funny like that. Everyone thinks they're the exception, but they'll get out from whatever horrible situation the universe has thrust upon them. At least that's what I thought. As the life drained from my body, the world around me just faded to black, and before I knew it, I had just died. Then there was the void. At first it was a little more than darkness, only broken by weird shapes and colors in the distance. As I regained a sense of surroundings, I was dragged towards a new world, one without pain, suffering, nor death. All there was were people on a journey to different destinations. Whether they had all died like myself, or if they weren't even born yet, I didn't know. All I knew was that I wasn't afraid anymore. The worries, the anxiety, and all my fears had been left behind. anticipation and from the memory of what had happened only a night ago. Even if my death had been little more than a nightmare, I knew for sure that I'd met up with my friends at the pub. The phone rang 3 times, then Jake picked up. "Rick, is that you? Where the hell are you?" Jake asked with a panicked, tired voice. I don't know what happened. I guess I fell asleep. I half asked, half stated. Danny got blame himself for not being there, but I knew the truth. It was my fault. During the next 2 months, he fell into deep depression. I couldn't blame him. He just lost the love of his life. I moved in with him just to help him pick up the pieces. He put on a strong face, trying his best to keep the ship afloat, but I could tell how close he was to just breaking down. If only I'd been there. It wasn't your fault, Dad. Had you been there, you might be gone too. You don't know that, but I did know, because the burglars weren't ever supposed to visit my parents' house. They were supposed to kill me. I had to come clean. I had to let him know the truth. But how could I? Half a year passed, and the secret ate at me. After everything that had happened, I still didn't know how to explain it. Still, I decided it was time to share my curse. Dad, can we talk? Yeah, what's going on? He asked with a worried expression on his face. He knew me well, and he could tell a heavy burden was weighing me down. I started by telling him about my first death, down to the smallest detail. Of course, it matched everything that people had witnessed in the pub that night, even the location of the stab wound. I told him Danny had taken my place in death, and that I felt guilty. Naturally, he was skeptical at first, but then I told him about my mother. I didn't spare him any details. I told him where I'd gotten shot, and the door had been broken down, and that there were 2 robbers. Every detail matched perfectly down to the letter. I'm sorry, Dad. It was my fault. I killed her. He just sat there in silence, processing what I just told him. It wasn't your fault. I was confused. There wasn't a single ounce of anger in his words, only overwhelming empathy. How can you say that? She didn't have to die. He mulled over his next words carefully before speaking. You didn't do anything wrong, Rick. You just went about your life, and these things happened to you. I don't know why you've been brought back, or even how, but you're not to blame for what is done to you. So you believe me? I asked. He nodded, embraced me in a hug. Suddenly, I wasn't alone in the world anymore. Someone knew what was happening to me. What if it happens again? Then we'll get through it together. He stood by these words, even as my next birthday rolled around. That death was more tame. I just slipped in the shower and broke my neck. The last thought that went through my mind as I left the world for a 3rd time was, how cliche. Once again, I awoke in my bed. I called out for my dad, making sure he was still alive, horrified that he might have taken my place. I couldn't even breathe until he came rushing to my side, asking what had happened. I broke my neck, but I'm fine, I think. It took a while before I figured out who had taken my place that time, but once I heard that my boss had died, something broke inside me. He was the kindest man I'd ever met. Just like myself, he slipped and broken his neck. That was the final straw. It wasn't some bizarre coincidence I could brush off, nor a premonition. I decided then and there that I couldn't live with the responsibility. I had to put a stop to it, even if it meant giving up my own life. I figured that if I took control over my own fate and killed myself outside of my own birthday, maybe I could prevent more people from dying. First, I left behind a long letter to my father, explaining why I'd chosen to leave. I couldn't face him in person. I knew he'd just try to talk me out of it, but it was something I had to do. I couldn't allow any more people to die on my behalf. Alas, fate is like a fickle bee. No matter how hard I tried, I just couldn't end my own life. I tried hanging, but the rope broke. Then I tried to shoot myself, but the gun jammed. When that failed, I tried to drive my car into a tree, but I somehow survived that as well. Any attempt was met with failure. All I could do years went by, and on the 18th of August 2009, I would die for the 14th time. I'd already fallen sick a week earlier, much to the doctor's confusion. According to each and every laboratory value, I was fine, yet I kept getting sicker. My father and I both knew my time was near, but we also knew I'd be forcefully brought back. Then at midnight on my birthday, my heart just gave out. I was jolted awake in my own bed, and the sickness was a little more than a distant memory. "Dad," I called out. No response. I got out of bed, called his name again. I was met with silence. I didn't have to call out a third time. I already knew what happened. I carefully walked into his room, horrified at what I knew would come. He was dead, just gone from a heart attack. He'd taken my place, and I could do nothing to save him. The funeral came and went in a blur. The only noticeable thing was the missing seats from the people who had passed before him. Some of them had lived their own lives and died as nature intended, but a number of them were supposed to live on. Instead, they just taken my place in death. I inherited a number of things from my father. Among them, I found a letter addressed to me. It looked rather worn, so I could tell he'd written it a long time ago. "Dear Richard, today is your birthday, and it has officially been a year since your mother passed. While I miss her greatly, I'm thankful to still have you around. I know that if she was given the choice, she would want you to live. And I feel the same way. We both know that I might one day take your place in death. Never doubt that I would happily give my life if it means that you may live. You didn't choose this curse, so never blame yourself. Just do what every person is supposed to. Appreciate the people around you, because you never know which day might be their last. I love you, Dad." Since I read that letter, I've been looking for a way out. My father might want me to stay behind, but how can I live on knowing that I'm taking someone's place? I've long since left town, living by myself in a cabin somewhere away from people. Hopefully, if I have no one left that cares for me, people will stop dying. At least until I can figure out not only how to die, but how to actually stay dead. I'm sorry. The next story is called Decay by Richard Saxon. "Am I going to die?" the kid asked me as he was being rolled in onto the operating theater. It was a question I'd heard 1,000 times before, but answering it truthfully hadn't become any easier, even after years at the hospital. "Of course not. We're going to fix you up," I lied. He'd been crushed in a horrific car accident, and though we would put all our efforts into saving his life, hope was a limited resource. The fact that he even remained conscious despite losing most of his blood was bizarre enough, but after 10 years on the job, nothing surprised me anymore. The anesthesiologist quickly put him under while we scrubbed in for surgery. Damien would be the surgeon, a specialist in polytrauma cases, and I'd assist. No sooner had we opened him up before we shared a look of disappointment. There was no chance in hell he'd survive through surgery. Despite our lack of faith, we tried our best, but after only half an hour on the table, his heart gave out. How was he still alive when he arrived? Damien asked. He pronounced the time of death and left us to clean up the mess. I took the responsibility of cleaning the kid up for the morgue, a task I committed to countless times before. It wasn't something I personally enjoyed, but to me it was my final chance to pay respect to the dead. The kid couldn't have been more than 15, as As I put the needle to his open abdomen, his body twitched for a moment. I retracted the needle in surprise, wondering what had caused a post-mortem spasm. Then the boy suddenly gasped for air as his eyes shut open. He let out the most violent scream imaginable as he suddenly returned to life. "Help me," he begged with a guttural voice as I stumbled back in panic and slipped onto the floor. I called for help and the rest of the team came running into the operating theater, each panicking as they witnessed the dead boy scream on the operating table. His spine was fractures, so though he yelled in agony, he could do nothing to move. The anesthesiologist quickly attempted to sedate him while we checked his vitals. Despite all evidence pointing to the contrary, his heart had not started beating again. He was supposed to be dead. I started chest compressions, desperately trying to get his heart going. I cringed at the sound of his ribs cracking beneath my hands, and the boy's screams turned to gargles as he was unable to gasp for another breath. "He's not going under," the anesthesiologist yelled as he gave the kid a second dose of propofol. Of course, without a functioning heart, there'd be no way for the drug to flow through his veins, even as I tried my best to pump for him. After an hour of compressions, the chief of surgery had intervened and ordered us to stop. At that point, we caused more damage than we helped. What's happening to me?" the kid stuttered, still conscious. None of us responded. We couldn't find any words to describe the horrific sight before us. Most of the staff had left due to the sight. We've faced many challenges in our career, but nothing quite like this. "What's your name?" I asked. Despite already having it seen in the file, I just wanted him to focus. "Brian Dawson," he responded. I took a deep breath, doing my best to keep my composure. "You were in an accident, Brian," I told him. His eyes darted frantically around the room as he started to realize where he was. He tried to lift his neck, but due to the spinal fracture, he was completely paralyzed. "I can't move. I can't move," he cried. I walked closer, standing directly above him. "Brian, your heart isn't beating," I said. The chief of surgery, George, grabbed me by my shoulder and whispered into my ear, "We need to isolate the OR. Whatever is happening here is beyond us, and it could be contagious," George said. He rushed into the preparation room and picked up the phone. Through the glass door, I couldn't hear what he said, but I assumed he was calling security to shut down the ward. What about my father?" Brian asked, trying to hold back tears. I was taken aback by his question. I just told him his heart was destroyed, and that was essentially dead, yet his first concern was regarding his father. "I'm sorry, Brian, he died on impact," he sobbed quietly. "So what was going to happen to me? I'm going to die, aren't I?" he asked. I didn't know what to say. I'd never been in any similar situation, so I just gave the only answer I thought might be of some comfort. "You're not alone. I'm staying here until the end." George had been quick to shut down the operating theater, and the Center for Disease Control had long since been alerted to our situation. We had nothing to do but to wait and pray to any god that Brian wasn't contagious. I had already been exposed, so I examined Brian, checking for any chance of improving his situation. "Can you feel this?" I asked as I checked all his limbs. "Not a thing," he responded, "but it hurts so much on the inside." "Where exactly does it hurt?" I asked. "Everywhere. Please do something," he begged. I gave Brian a dose of fentanyl, but without a heartbeat to move. The drug around, I had little hope it would take any effect at all. To keep him distracted from the pain, I asked mundane things about life, what his hobbies were, stuff. He was smart enough to realize my intentions, but went along with it, either out of fear or because he actually hoped someone could save him. Hours passed by while we waited for someone to tell us what to do. Half the surgical staff had been put into quarantine, terrified that they might be infected. Finally, the CDC arrived on the scene, fully geared in hazmat suits. They allowed us to roll Brian into his own space, a pre-operation room that had been evacuated, so he could stay somewhat comfortable. The rest of us would be put into surgical office while the situation was being assessed. I decided to stay with Brian. No one should have to suffer alone, especially with the CDC agents probing him with all sorts of needles, enthusiastically taking samples. The only reason they allowed me to stay was because I kept him relatively calm. We walked through the night. After the procedures were finished, I couldn't sleep, and I doubt Brian was physically capable of it. My eyes feel a bit weird, he said. Do they hurt? No, the edges are just kind of blurry. It's weird. I left to talk to George, who was still working around the clock, calling around, making sure the other patients were redirected somewhere else. What if we put the kid on a heart-lung machine? I asked. George put the phone down for a moment and sighed. Then what? He has no functioning liver. His aorta is cut into pieces and his intestines shredded. Even if we got him a new heart, he'd never survive. George responded, just keep him company while you can. I knew he was right, but some of my professional knowledge was put aside due to the insane nature of the situation. Doctor, Brian shouted. I rushed to his side. I can't see, he stuttered. I pulled out a flashlight and examined his eyes. Both pupils were unresponsive, and his eyes had started to almost deflate, which was one of the stages of decomposition. Brian had started to rot. Please, I'm so scared. Brian was a brave kid, but he started to lose his composure, just like everyone else in the ward. I kept talking to him, but the inevitable truth was that if he kept decomposing, he'd soon lose all his senses, all the while being conscious to experience it. As horrible as it might sound, I begged that it might finally allow him to pass on. We kept talking. I asked him if there was anyone he wanted to call, but as I already knew from the others, Brian's mother had died during childbirth, and his father had been in the same accident as himself. As we talked, Brian's voice kept getting louder, as if he was struggling to hear. Are you hearing me all right? I asked. What did you say? Brian basically yelled. His hearing had deteriorated within minutes, going from impaired to deafness, before I could even begin to help. With him being blind and deaf, we no longer had a way of communicating. No matter my attempts, I couldn't comfort the dying kid, and the CDC quickly decided that my presence had become unnecessary. Brian kept screaming in terror and agony after I left. For each passing second, his own body started digesting itself, and nothing we could do would take the pain away. By the morning, his screams had silenced. I barged into the room, much to the dismay of the agents. Brian was hooked up to hundreds of cables, monitoring his heart, brain, muscles, and vital values. Of course, his heart showed no activity, and the decay had progressed to shut down all his muscles. He had quieted down not because the pain was gone, but because he wasn't able to scream anymore. The only part of his body still working was his brain. What the hell happened? I asked. Get him out of here, one of the men demanded. The other man complied, but went outside with me to explain the situation. You specialized facility. The senior